Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an Airbus pilot, and in today's video let's talk about the challenges of hot and high operations. We're currently at Albuquerque by Dominic Design Team, which is a really nice airport. Thank you very much to Anybuilds for giving it to me, and it's a really challenging one as well because it's located at a very high altitude, 5,300 feet over here, and it usually has hot temperatures. Currently 26 degrees, I've seen over 30 here in the recent days, and that is Celsius, not Fahrenheit. So what is the big problem resulting from this combination of high elevation and high temperatures? Basically, you gotta imagine it this way. The higher up you are, the lesser is the density of the air, and the warmer the air is, the lesser is the density of the air. If you combine the two, you end up in a situation where you have very little air around your airplane, which is immediately visible when you later on in the takeoff run have a look at the indicated airspeed versus the true airspeed that we see up here. This can cause several problems for us during both takeoff as well as landing. Let's quickly discuss takeoff first. So during takeoff we are going to need much more runway. Why is that? Number one, jet engines can only produce so much thrust. And under these situations, we always got to think about the engine out situation here as well. They are not going to produce that much. So to give you a quick idea, our departure runway here is 10,000 foot, that's more than 3,000 or almost 3,000 meters long. And if you look at this, we're at a gross weight of 141.9 thousand pounds. That equals about 70 tons. That is heavy, but not overwhelmingly heavy on an A320 family aircraft. Nonetheless, we only get a flex temperature of 51 degrees. Now, taking into consideration that we have an outside temperature of 26, and you can see that we are not reducing our maximum thrust very much over here with that flex temperature. Now, if we would do the same takeoff at an airfield at sea level, we'd probably be in the 60s with a flex temperature. Now the next thing is the slower acceleration. That means we'll need more runway, as is very much visible by our stop margin of only 741 feet. That's somewhere about 250 meters-ish. So we got a 3,000 meter runway, we only have 250 meter stop margin. That means we need a lot of runway for an A320. Now, on a wide body, an A330, A340, that would be normal. But for an A320, you can really see how large the performance impact is over here. Now, from here on, let's quickly talk about what comes after the takeoff as well, and that's the terrain that is in front of us. So, due to the combination of a very low air density, both because of the altitude and the temperature, we will necessarily not be climbing very well. We have a high true airspeed, while we have a reduced rate of climb compared to sea level and ICAO standard atmosphere operations, and therefore our airplane does not climb at a very steep gradient, which is going to make it pretty difficult to avoid terrain ahead of you, especially in the case of an engine failure. This is something very apparent at runways like runway 3 here in Albuquerque, or for example also runways 26 in Las Vegas, which are really limiting runways. Or think about Johannesburg, these type of airports. Now, let's go ahead and have a look at what this looks like in a practical operation. I'm going to release that parking brake here, then let's increase our thrust.
On runway 0
and take off, and you will see in practical terms what a takeoff run is going to look like under these conditions. So the engines are stabilized here. A little bit of forward stake, man flags 51, SRS, runway, auto thrust blue. Thrust set. And now take a close look at the relation between the ground speed and the indicated airspeed. 80 knots on the speed indicator, 100 knots on the ground speed. 100 knots indicated, 120 knots ground speed. A little bit of tailwind as well to make it fancy, but compare it to the true airspeed, you see immediately what I'm talking about. V1, rotate. Now let's see how well we are actually going to climb out. So 15 degrees pitch, positive climb, gear up, nav. And when we're looking back at the airport, that is not an angle that we're used to. Normally we're a lot higher up. Right then, let's turn that flight director off and let's start turning onto a downwind for an ILS approach to runway 8, where we can have a look at a couple more situations over here. Now, let's get that speed up to the S speed, please. Here we go. Climbing up to, let's make that 9,000 to make things a little bit more interesting. Now, what we can clearly see, we're doing 170 knots indicated, which is 195 knots true airspeed. That means we are flying very, very fast. And we'll just be accelerating the airplane here all the way to like 215, I believe was the clean speed. So flaps 0. And then let's have a look at what our true airspeed is going to look like when we are flying at this indicated airspeed. So reaching about 215. Track 260 for a nice downwind. Now let's do 1,000 feet a minute here, climbing up to 9,000, and we'll also bring up the ILS so that we can prepare for a nice little approach. Now, look at this, we're doing 215 indicated, which is almost 250 true airspeed. That's the difference, and that's going to make it very interesting flying the approach. Now, in these hot conditions, the altimeter is under reading. That means your true altitude is higher than your indicated altitude. Therefore, when you are following a 3-degree glide slope, your actual approach path is quite a bit steeper than those 3 degrees, which makes it, let's just say, difficult to slow the airplane down. Also, you will have a greater vertical speed, and you will be approaching the airport quite a bit faster than what you would normally be used to, making the approach entirely more challenging for you as the pilot. So, activating approach phase down here, and let's go to manage speed. We'll nicely fly it down at the green dot, and then we'll see how things are gonna look like. In general, my recommendation for approaches like this is that you pick ILS approaches whenever possible. However, when an ILS approach is not feasible, and when you have to fly a non-precision approach, then expect that you are going to be rather high on the poppies. You may either come in at 3 wides or even at 4 wides, which you should take into consideration and expect to disconnect the automatics and correct your flight path back down to the poppy manually. The big advantage of using poppy guidance and using ILS guidance is that both of those navigation aids are referenced by sheer geometry, so the difference in true altitude is not going to be as visible. But you will notice when you approach an airport like Albuquerque, when you pass the final approach fix on the glide slope, you will actually be at a lower indicated altitude than what you are charted to be at. And that's not a problem with your aircraft systems, that's entirely expected. Right, so let's go ahead and clean this thing up down here. Give me a radial indirect, please. We are passing a beam the glide slope, so let's start turning base, and then I'll talk you a little bit over the specialties of actually conducting and flying that approach in the high temperatures. You can see I'm keeping my airplane slow, just flying down at the green dot speed. However, we're still doing 240 knots indicated or true airspeed. So what you want to achieve is you generally want to have the true airspeed, respectively the ground speed, under control. So when we're turning base over here, we don't want you flying that at 240 knots. We absolutely want to fly that slower. So let's go flaps 1. Even though it may seem very
Altimeter
slow
setting.
on your airspeed indicator, and why is this thing complaining about the altimeter setting? This is completely right. So let's close the RAS. So you want to keep it at the correct true airspeed and respectively at the correct ground speed on the approach. So now you can see I've already reduced down to the S speed, still doing 220 knots, which is pretty fast, to be honest, for a stage in the approach like this. So consider reducing even further. Now, I am intentionally not doing that on this particular video because I want to demonstrate the effects. So we'll be capturing the glide slope in config 1 at the S speed as we would be used to under normal operations. We will see the result here in a moment. We're going to get an excessive vertical speed to be able to maintain the glide. Look at that, 230 knots ground. So you need something like 1,200 feet a minute to maintain the glide slope, and in that configuration you can't even reduce your airspeed and idle. So time to do something about it, gear down, and we might even need some speed brakes to be able to slow the aircraft down properly. Now let's go flaps 2. And now let's see what's going to happen. We're now doing 220 knots and we are like 8 nautical miles out from the runway. Remember, the DME down here is not necessarily reliable in the United States, so we gotta keep our aircraft under control here. Now, speed is barely reducing, and that's even with the gear down and the speed brakes out. So let's go flaps 3, and then once we are nice and slow, so basically now let's go flaps full. Remember, no spoilers with flaps full. A320, in the 330 you can do that. You need to do it in the A330. Alright, and now speed's coming back nicely. Now we're getting nicely established. And now look at this, 150 indicated is 170 true airspeed. That means, again, we need to descend quicker, we are approaching quicker, so basically everything that we are doing needs to be done earlier. Reduce your speed early, use as many drag devices as you need to, and remember, when you want to follow the standard Airbus SOP, think twice. You may want to reduce that speed much earlier. Alright, and with that we are now nicely established on the ILS, and look at this, we're flying 140 indicated, which is 157 knots true airspeed, so we are really approaching fast here, which we are not normally used to from the A320 family. So let's take a moment to talk about the flare now, because that's another thing that's interesting with hot and high operations. A couple of things to take into consideration over here. Even though your indicated airspeed is of course at the normal rate for an approach, your airplane still has more energy because you're still moving faster at the higher true airspeed. Therefore, it will also take a slightly earlier flare in order to be able to arrest the rate of descent and not bang the airplane into the ground. Apart from that, obviously due to the higher speeds, you will have to lose more energy. So if you're using that auto brake, especially if you don't have a brake fan, be prepared to put the thrust reverser on in order to be able to slow that airplane down. Now let's have a look at what this looks like in practical operation down here. Let's put this airplane down, and you will notice that normally the flare altitude in the A320 family is between 20 and 30 feet. Today I'll be flaring at about 35 feet. Giving ourselves an additional 10 feet to get the airplane down. Alright then, continue. And now let's see how this is gonna go. Note the rate of descent here, 900 feet a minute.
50, 40, 30,
Flare,
20,
idle,
drive.
touchdown. You can see I flared at roughly the 40 call out, just after that, and you could really see how the airplane needed that additional altitude. Had I flared at 25 feet at the normal altitude, that would have banged us into the ground. Alright, so 70 knots, let's bring this thing to a stop. And with that, welcome to Albuquerque. I hope that you guys have enjoyed this little tutorial. I most certainly enjoyed doing the Hot&High operation over here again. For now, thank you very much for watching. If you got any questions, you know the drill, put them into the comments below. And with that, thank you very much for watching. As always, this video does not have a character of actual real-life flight instructions, so if you're a real-world pilot, please consult your manuals or your instructors. And if you're a flight simmer wondering why I'm putting this notice on here, you know that drill. Aviation. It's always interesting. Nonetheless, thank you very much for watching. As always, like, comment and subscribe, and if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much, and see you all again on the next one.